Today on Talk to Tea, we welcome two special guests, Julia Menard and Gordon White. Julia is a mediator, trainer, author, and coach who specializes in supporting leaders to find the courage to engage in conflict and to collaborate constructively. For over 25 years, Gordon has specialized in mediation, facilitation, and leadership coaching. He assists individuals to shift how they relate to their unique challenges in a way that drives more innovative and productive initiatives. Together, they are the On Conflict Leadership Institute. And today, we're going to riff about all things creative conflict. Let's dive in. Welcome, Julia and Gordon, to our episode of Talk to Tea. It's so great to be with you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really, as we talked about in our prep for our podcast, so excited by the work both of you are up to. And today we're going to talk about creative conflict and that big subject. I know we have lots to riff about on this. I'm really curious in reviewing, basically what you provided in terms of creative conflict and your thoughts and some of the key points that we're going to, chat about today. Both of you responded with there's a deep relationship between understanding and creativity. I'd love to hear more about that.
Got it. So as you contemplate hearing about it, do you have any sort of more specific question to ask or any thoughts about it yourself?
Oh, you don't even want to get me started on that deep thought. Nice try, Coach. Passing it back over. Gordon, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, there is for sure, and I think Julia will have more to say about this, there is for sure a fundamental principle that, is embraced, I think, by most mediators, the idea that if you can get people off their kind of oppositional communication and more into in-depth understanding of what matters to each of them, that's the deeper level of understanding, right? That generally also releases a greater likelihood of them being able to be creative together. I wouldn't say it guarantees it always, right? But it certainly makes it more likely.
Yeah. Julia?
Well, firstly, Tracy, I wanted to thank you for inviting Gordon and I to engage in a dialogue about creativity and conflict, because Gordon and I have worked in so many contexts where people are very stressed. They're very contracted. And creativity is probably the last thing on their minds, or any of our minds, when we're in a place of fear, stress, and contraction. So to be invited to have an engaged dialogue about the relationship between creativity and conflict is really quite delicious. So that was the first piece. I really wanted to thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you both for your generosity in being here.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's an important topic. So
Yes.
And there's a lot. I know. I feel the same way, that there's a lot the three of us will get into. I think as the opening gambit, with regard to the relationship between deeper understanding and creativity, one of the things that, and I'll say maybe I'll be saying something similar to Gordon, but in my own way, but one of the things I think we've both noticed as mediators is when, and I'll speak for myself, when I get really stuck, this is the way I think it should go. You should do this. You need to do this way. My creativity just dries up and I become so myopic and so focused on how can I manipulate you? How can I convince you? Like, we have darker sides to us, like, how can I get you to do what I want? And I'm not in any way in the ballpark of creativity. So whenever we're engaged in interpersonal conflict and conflict with another, the challenge is, how do I settle my nervous system down enough that I can start to move from this no state, which Gordon and I talk about in our work, from this no state to a yes state, So then I can get curious, firstly, about myself. What's going on with myself? What's the deeper understanding of what this conflict is triggering? And what's going on with you over there in your universe, in your playground? And once we can move into the vibration, if we want to call it the vibration of curiosity, well, creativity is not far behind. Because we need to have, and I can say more, but I'll leave it there for now, but we need that sense of direction, that I'm looking for understanding within myself. And I'm looking to understand you before I can even start to draw the curtain across to creativity. We're not even there yet, but it's the fodder for it, I suppose. Does that make any sense, Tracy? Landing on you?
Yeah.
About, you know, I know you're not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
100%. And thank you both for, it's always important to explore the words on a paper and in terms of like the definition or the true meaning behind those words to the individuals themselves. So thank you both. Gordon, what I heard you say was the, supporting people to, or even us ourselves, understanding what's important here, what's important to this individual, and being able to actually hear that. And Julia, 100% in agreement. Self-awareness plays a huge part in this. Our ability to understand when we're, as you say, contracted, or we have, regressed into ourselves or shut down, stressed to some degree, so that we can then, and it really takes that self-awareness, which, to be self-aware then allows us to self-regulate, which then allows us to come back into a conversation. And I think too, when we're in those situations, rather than fear them, it's what I began to see was an opportunity to actually leverage them once we've calmed down that nervous system. What are your thoughts on, and I know we're gonna, like, here we go, right? Where I'm already like, let's get in here in terms of the leveraging conflict part. And you may want to plank it out a little bit more. But I think what you're both talking about is the starting points to be able to begin engaging in this really creative space, like the opportunity in it for so much innovation and creativity, if we stop fearing it, is a good stepping stone, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Or even being afraid and still doing it, because otherwise, if you make reducing the fear a prerequisite, then you may actually block an opportunity that might be there, right? You want to deal with emotional flooding, when it's not serving you, but at the same time, it's kind of like that well-known book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, if it's all right, I just want to go back to something Julie was saying and add a piece to it.
Of course.
It has to do with the creative process in relationship to conflict. And it's that idea of getting to new understandings, but that it's not static, because sometimes people might think going into the conversation, you've got understandings, I've got understandings, we've got to learn those, but that's not actually all that happens. Another part of it is that people actually discover new understandings about themselves in the conversation. And conflict provides an opportunity for that sort of internal creative process of greater understanding of oneself, right? And that's something that Julie and I are very big on, just in general. The conflict is an opportunity, not just for me to understand the other person better, but for me to understand myself better, right? Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I know I've taken you a little off course and I've actually forgotten the question, but I want to add that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. It's a brilliant deviation, if you will. Absolutely. And I think that's the piece where I get super fascinated, of course, is that it's highly transformational being in conflict, personally transformational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Brilliant deviation.
Yeah, and I would add it can be if you're open to it, right? But yeah. And that's one thing I think that we are sometimes, when we're helpful, able to help people with, right? Is to open to that way of seeing it. So there's an opportunity for them to become more self-aware and grow as a person in the context of that difference they have with the other person.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up the thread that I think you were starting with, Tracy, and I think bring it back to this notion of highly transformational. You were talking about fear.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, conflict is also this, it's a double-edged sword, it's a fine line. I think I mentioned I've done a TEDx talk, sorry, through the Justice Institute of BC. They did a TEDx. And I spoke about the reason I'm in the field, and it has to do with World War II and the fact that my mother had to leave her hometown and my grandfather was murdered. So there is this intergenerational ancestral trauma coming in my line, a very direct, for me, very direct, in that I didn't grow up with community. My mother never got to go back to her home country. And many people have been touched by the trauma of conflict and the violence of conflict and the power over dynamic of conflict. And Gordon and I, although we haven't been in war-torn countries, we come in when people are highly stressed. I remember a client telling me once that their eyebrows were falling out, their eyebrow hairs were falling out. Others go on stress leave before or after we're working with them. And a whole host of physical conditions and estranged relationships and isolation. And I mean, there's a real dark side to conflict.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like there's either a fine line you're walking, and it goes right through all of our human hearts, to be able to really hold the possibility that I can have a dark side, that I do have a dark side, and that I need to engage with that dark side to be able to move through this in a way that's going to have some humility and balancing love and power. Balancing love and power, because we need the love to move through it, and we need to not be naive at the very same time. So I'll stop there. That was a bit of a riff.
No, that's a brilliant riff. Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. I love that. Walking that fine line. And yeah, thank you for sharing that personal piece about that ancestral trauma. I think it's a fascinating area, in terms of like the work I know we all do with clients is, oftentimes we'll address the here and now traumas or the here and now from this generation. And sometimes what we can discover is that it actually is a carry forward from many generations, or even a cultural carry forward. So I love that piece. It's an important piece to bring in here too. As people, potentially our listeners are wrestling with or rumbling with their own relationship to conflict, and where they butt up against what is too far for them, and what is any edges that they're playing with themselves. It's kind of a cool thing to dip into and to look into, for sure, and consider.
I bet you Gord has something to say, but if it's okay, Gord, I'm just going to add one more piece about that fear fine line.
Of course.
I don't know how this is going to come. And Tracy, you've told us that there might not be a lot of cuts, so people are getting the raw stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a very tiny riff, but I'm thinking about that idea of fear and conflict a little bit more. And there's a TV series that I just started watching, and it's called Counterpart. And it's the story of two worlds. They're identical parallel universes, but they ended up getting in conflict with each other. Pretty severe conflict, like power over murder, blah, blah, not trust. How did it start? Because they were identical when these two worlds started. They started with a tiny little difference. And then the tiny little difference, instead of being embraced and engaged with, started to make the other party afraid. And then they started thinking, you know what? We're not the bad guy here, but they might hurt us. So if they hurt us, we better create this really bad thing, because then we can defend ourselves. And down the rabbit hole they went, to the point where there's now plagues and murders and distrust, and from what were identical, cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And so, here we are the same beings. We're all energy. We're all connected. We're all human. And yet the differences that we have can stimulate fear in each other and othering each other. And that's where we lose our way. And I think you'll notice, I think Gord and I have a theme of the dark side of conflict, because really our job is to come in with the dark side and to transform it. And I loved when you said that, Tracy. Highly, conflict is highly transformational, being in conflict. Yes, it is. And it can be highly destructive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I love everything that you said, and I'm going to be mindful that we could go down multiple rabbit holes with the differences. And yeah, that was a brilliant example that you brought in. That I love the notion of being able to recognize differences in each other with curiosity and an open mind. And again, it kind of takes us back to, it begins truly with us and noticing what we can be with and what we cannot be with. And being willing to stretch those edges and navigate our own reactions to difference.
Yeah, and I can add another piece to that, because if it was just one person, that would be maybe as far as you could take it. But there's two people. So you can actually, and this is something maybe that we could offer, you can actually find ways to talk about that, right? Where, it's like, I don't know if I can go there today, Julia. I can talk about this, but I might need to reflect a bit or be ready to talk about this other topic, because the fear may be too great for me to go into that in a constructive way, right? So it isn't just the internal monitoring, which is perhaps the most important thing and it's essential, but the two people can also then begin to talk about how they're doing with each other. And they can also talk about the dynamic between them, right? How well are we communicating over this or exchanging, or is it beneficial now? Do we need to change something about it? And this, of course, is what, mostly what mediators do, right? Is we construct processes and we try to get people conscious of them and talking about them. Yeah.
Love it. As you said that, Gordon, and I may be putting you both on the spot a little, but you both strike me as such honest, integrous people that I imagine you are your work and your partnership with each other, that you actually practice this with each other. Am I fair in assuming that with your grins all over the screen here?
Yeah, you're noticing that we're both smiling a lot, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. But I imagine in your partnership, as it's formed and morphed, and the more you take on, and with your own podcasts and the new program that I know you're going to share a little bit about, that I imagine you are most certainly practicing that as you deepen your relationship and the demands on your time, and all of the constraints that I like to think contribute to finding yourselves in that space of possible transformation of your own relationship.
Do you want to go there first, Gord?
No, your turn first this time.
Well, I love, Tracy, that, I love that you're asking us that. And I'm very mindful that you are a very good coach. I'm like, this is so delicious, and it's being recorded, so lots of people are going to be listening. Gord and I do talk about our conflict on our own podcast, because of course we have a podcast called On Conflict. And we haven't necessarily, Tracy, had an opportunity to sit back and share our story with somebody, though, and especially with such a delicious listener as you, encouraging all these stories. So, what I will say about our differences as an opening statement is I have learned so much about myself in particular through my relationship with Gord, especially in the last year. I mean, Gord and I have known each other for more than 20 years in lots of different ways, and we've done some pretty significant work together. But it's been the last year since we created our signature course on how to have difficult conversations, putting our curriculum together, our minds together. And then our relationship's been accelerating because now, we have this newly launched course. I mean, all the things you're noticing, we have this new institute that we've created. And the last 6 months, I'd say, have been some of the most intense interpersonal learning for me. I don't know about ever, but Gord is just the best partner to have conflict with. I've got to tell you, because he will hang in there. And how many of us have had that experience where we're having a conflict and the person checks out? And Gord won't do that. We might need a break. We might say, okay, we're going to talk in an hour, or we'll get back together tomorrow. But his stamina for working it through right to the end is phenomenal. Not just stamina, also his willingness to take responsibility. That is such a big piece. And so it's an inspiration for me because, I'm not saying Gord is perfect. I'm just commenting on some of the things that work for me in our conflicting together. Because one of my foibles is I want to blame him. Like, I really want to blame him. It just feels so good just to think it's his fault. It's his fault we didn't figure out this technological thing. Why is it that this happened? Well, it's him. And that is such a dead end street. To set each other up as our enemies just doesn't go anywhere. And so it shows me the places where I want to do some dismantling. There's defense for a reason, because a part of me is afraid. A part of me is calling to be looked at, to be nurtured, to be held, to be healed. But that's not Gord's work for me. That's my work for me.
Yeah.
And maybe, my work with my God or whoever it is I'm doing that work with. And so when I get those hard places with Gord, that's what I do, and I don't know, I've just been really, really grateful. I mean, that's my opening statement. We could get into more detail if we do, but I'll stop there to see what lands over in those two faces on the screen.
Yeah.
Well, I could certainly jump, but I'm actually really curious about Gord's reflection on, obviously on the other side of the partnership.
Well, I do want to kind of respond in a mirror version of what Julia said, but before that, just to say that I'll add a little more to the story Julia told, which is that I think we increasingly, became partnered in the work we were doing, and we were also, because of the pandemic, isolated from others. And we actually, we'll often work like 5-10 hours together in a day, but we have literally only seen each other, is it 3 times in the last year in person?
Wow.
Yeah, and that has added, that whole dynamic has added a challenge to the fact that both of us are, we're psychological in nature, right? We're not simple people. So we both have a lot of complexity inside us. And, when we worked intermittently with each other, this was a tremendous advantage to us because we could be very empathetic and sympathetic to each other, and we understood each other really well. And it also helped us in our work with clients. But in being thrown together so much of the time without being in person, it has been extremely challenging for us at times and quite humbling, actually. And I, just like Julia, I am really not only grateful and amazed at what I've learned about myself, but also a bit shocked, that I would be blind to the degree that I was in certain ways after working in conflict for, like 25 years. So I guess this really highlights that this is growing through the conflict experience is really a lifelong journey if you want to embrace it, right? This is not something that kind of ends. I don't think it just more parts of you get revealed as time goes on. If you want to make use of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll just add just about Julia. You know what I think what I really appreciate about Julia is Julia, your curiosity. You know, you're gently curious about everything that's going on between us, which I think is really helpful. And you also don't let things go. Like sometimes I'll avoid stuff for a while. You know, when probably be better to talk about. I mean, sometimes avoidance is good, right? Because timing's important. But I think sometimes I over avoid, and Julia will sort of, you know, just gently get us talking about things that we should be talking about. And also, although I'm, you know, I'm good at process because I'm a mediator, Julia's like just an incredible master at the details of interactive process, and you know, helps us chart our way through these different, yeah, just conflict challenges that we get into.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks for sharing that. I know I took a risk and put you both on the spot of something that maybe you weren't prepared to air. So thank you so much for your generosity there. I love what you said in so many ways, because you know, some words that really popped out in terms of I've always thought about, you know, some of the teams, you know, and I know we all, like the three of us work with teams and work in teams and in businesses. I've, over the years, you know, we're pattern watchers by nature, coaches. And I've noticed certain things or elements like pop up that are predictably there when I know that conflict is going to go well and potentially fall to that other side, which is embracing the dark, Julia, as you said, and also become fruitful, as I like to say. And, you know, you both, you know, brought about constraints are there. Yes, there's a tension. And it's in that tension, there's choice points between we can look for ourselves or we can deflect, we can blame, might fall over into the other side, less fruitful if we go there. We were willing to stand in. Gordon, Julia commented that you're one that stands in with her. I have it that leads to just greater intimacy. And I'm hearing you both like echo that that's what emerging without actually using that word per se. Humility or humbleness is something else that I've often, and then gentle curiosity, Julia. I mean, and both of you, you're both gentle in my experience of your being. And I just have it that is something that's essential to the structure. Not letting things go, but not in a righteous, I got to be right about this way, but a more of a flexibility, but holding the process. Like Julia, mastery in that is brilliant. And then of course, the falling over into maybe the darker side where it becomes less fruitful doesn't mean that it's wrong to do, but it's maybe a good noticing is when we're blaming, deflecting, or avoiding something. So kind of capture that, you know, from your thinking. Do you think I have a good handle on what might be a structure that creative conflict may birth if we pay attention to these as sort of key points? Any thoughts or adds or rebuttals? Those are welcome here too.
Are you asking about a potential structure? I don't know if I quite
Yeah,
caught.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking, is there anything I missed in terms of like, these are the elements that I often hear are components of what will ensure conflict turns into fruitful conflict or healthy conflict, or creative conflict.
Yeah.
Are there any other elements that you think are a vital component?
Gord? I'm thinking of the model, but you might be going somewhere else.
Well, I was just thinking of that kind of balance we were talking about an hour or two ago, which, and I might have mentioned this already, but I think that it's a little bit like a razor's edge might be not quite the right analogy, but there's you can engage constructively in conflict, but then you can also be more confrontational. And it's well, there's a big picture side to it, and then there's kind of in the moment side to it. And if it's completely cooperative and people are being only positive and they're not bringing up what they strongly disagree with, then you're not going to get the opportunity of the creativity that comes from confrontation. But if the confrontation is too extreme, then people will bruise each other and they may shut down and they may not be able to do it next time. So it's finding a balance between the constructive, creative engagement in conflict and the ability to also be, to a degree, confrontational, where the ideas actually oppose and interact in a way that helps to give rise to greater creativity. And that this whole kind of dynamic, this is not something that I find is easy, to find that balance, nor is it that easy to help others do it. I mean, a lot of the situations that Julie and I find ourselves in, just kind of typically, it's enough work to just get people in the same room and being able to talk to each other, let alone be thinking about how can I help these people maximize creativity, Yeah. Now, in the team situations you're referring to, then I think the opportunity to do that opens up a lot more, right? Yeah. So anyway, I don't know, maybe I've been a bit long-winded and not very precise here, but what I'm trying to say is that to actualize the creative aspect of conflict, I think you have to find a balance between the constructive and the confrontational elements of it, and monitor those, probably be able to talk about them and monitor them in a conscious way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think you brought up some really incredible points. Like, what I heard in that was like gradients, and again, it takes being sort of curious in every moment of the conversation and really like checking your own feet, your own body for, hey, who am I even being in this moment? Because and this is the area of fascination too for me, is that what I might experience to be constructive. Well, I grew up in a background that welcomed healthy debate, and some of it got loud. And so my capacity, I've had to be really mindful of my capacity isn't necessarily someone else's. And it happens in a wink of an eye, before you even know it. Now you're in hot water because your passion is actually being perceived as aggression or confrontational. And you got to be, again, humble and willing to step back to adapt, I think is a better word, adapt your gradient to match your partner in that moment. Yeah. Finding that balance, as you say, Gordon, it's brilliant. Yeah. Julia, I'm pretty sure you're chomping to,
Well, I'm wanting to circle back to the actual, question that brought us here, but it was something about like, what are the ingredients or the tips or whatever that would go into maximizing the possibility for creativity, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so what came up for me was actually the model that Gordon and I have co-created around how to have, we can say how to have a difficult conversation, but maybe, if you point at what is it, what's the goal? Maybe it's how to have a transformational or how to have a creative conversation. That might be really what is at the heart of it. So if we end up transforming into that, Tracy, we'll have to go, and Tracy Burns, ding, Tracy Burns, ding, in this podcast. So I'm just going to run through for you what Gordon and I have created in terms of the model, because I think each one of these 8 steps have something that relates to creating the conditions for creativity in conversation. So is that good? Can we do that little journey?
Please do. Thank you. If you're willing to share, I love it.
Yeah. Well, let's see. This is completely extemporaneous, just off the top of my head. So,
yeah.
All right.
Rip away.
All right. So what Gordon and I co-created, and it's been a development from a lot of influences. He and I have been on faculty at the Justice Institute, their Center for Conflict Resolution, Center for Leadership for many, many years. We both taught in other contexts, a lot of influences, but communication. So essentially, the first couple of steps of our model, the very first one is to figure out your why. Like, why do you even want to have this conversation? What's your purpose in having it? And, we talk about a North Star statement. You can use different language, but just to get straight in your head, what is the overriding intention going in? And a lot of us don't do that. We have some disturbing little point inside of our bodies and we see the person and then we open our mouth and say, something's really bugging me about you. Boom, no creativity there because we're in that contracted state,
Yeah.
right? So doing our work before we even open our mouths, what do I want? What's my overriding North Star? The second, and we call it find your motivation.
Mhm.
The second one we called build your power, but I think as I'm looking at you, Tracy, and thinking about ontological coaching, which I know is so important for you, I'm
Yeah.
thinking that build your power is also about who are you being and who do you
Mhm.
want to be in this conversation. And sometimes we need to connect with a sense of empowerment, confidence to be able to settle and decide who do I want to be in this conversation. So some of that might involve doing some research about the topic. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to empower yourself and build your power, but we recommend doing that as well. And I think both those things can connect with creativity because when I'm more settled in myself, we're more in that yes state that we spoke about earlier in the conversation.
Mhm.
Then we've got a third step before you even open your mouth and get into the conversation, and that's setting it up well. Some of that has to do with self-regulation, preparing myself. I might get triggered, the other person might get triggered. How do I stay in that more open and creative flow state? Do I want to bring a little rock in my hand? Do I want to bring my cup of tea that I hold? How am I going to ground myself? You've got it, a beautiful little crystal that you
Last
hold.
part. Yeah.
Last part. Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
thinking those things through, like investing enough time. If this conversation is creating a bodily reaction in me or, in you, and or it's causing me to blab to somebody else, I'm complaining to my spouse or I'm complaining to my buddy or my colleague, it means pay attention, do the work.
Mhm.
So those are the first three steps of our model. Find your motivation, build your power, set it up well. And if you've got the bandwidth, I'll jump into the rest of the model, which is kind of like when you open your mouth.
Yeah, please do, Julia. It's brilliant.
Okay. So here you are, we've done a little bit of preparation in terms of orienting ourselves to a creative conversation, releasing creativity. And the very first piece is connect with that other person, establish connection. We don't often go there. Again, we often start the conversation in a contracted way and we contract the other person inadvertently. And John and Julie Gottman have done some wonderful research about most of the time how a conversation starts is how it ends. So be intentional with what your best intention is, et cetera, et cetera. And we talk about that in our course. The next step, so you've done this kind of connecting with the other person, then if I'm going to go to the place of blame, which we also spoke about in this conversation, we're going to contract. How do you stay out of blame? Go into the place of describing behaviors, being very concrete. This is the situation. This is what I've noticed. Be sensorial, not sensational.
Oh, I love that.
I just made it up in this minute.
Yeah.
Inspire me, Tracy. Yeah, be sensorial, not sensational. And so, we talk more about that in our work. But then the other piece, which we spoke about at the beginning, this whole thing about deeper understanding leads to creativity. That's the next part of the model, which is developing understanding. How do you do that? Well, there's a lot to speak about in terms of how you actually dig in and, ask certain kinds of questions. A lot of these are classic coaching kinds of skills around getting curious and asking deeper questions. But they're the coaching skills in a larger context, in a context of a process that we lead people through to get to this new place. And then lastly, don't lead with your solutions because you get this kind of convergent, I think it's convergent thinking. If I get really stuck on one idea,
Yeah.
and I'm not allowing myself, firstly, to even listen to you, let alone understand you, because you're going to bring in new information. So the decisions are going to be very different if we allow all the understanding to come out together. We'll go to a whole new place. So leave solutions to the end. And that can help to prompt more creativity. And then the last piece is don't think of this as a one-off kind of conversation. let's say we're engaged in something really important and let's follow up together, because creativity needs space. If I feel a time pressure, I get
Mhm.
distracted and my creative essence, my juice, my flow isn't there. So
Right.
so those are 8 steps. Those are the 8 steps of our model. And I never before had thought about how each step relates to creativity, but I will forever be changed because of it. So thanks, Tracy. That was
Yeah,
super.
you're welcome. Transformational as we speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
Awesome.
know if
I
Gord
love
wants
it.
to add to that or change that, or Gord.
I'll just add one piece. So I think you've brought out creative elements all the way through, right? And you can be creative in how you engage in conflict in lots of different ways all the way through, and we've talked about some of that. The point I want to just make is that it really explicitly creative part of that methodology or model is actually step 7. So it actually takes going through all the others to release the full creative potential, right? People need to get to a place where they understand each other deeper in a different way, and then that can really blossom in its fullness.
And
I
step
love
7,
it.
because people may not be familiar with the model, but
Yeah.
step 7 we call innovating and problem solving. But it's essentially, it's the end of the conversation when you start to get to action planning and all the things we all want to get to. Let's solve it right now. And what
Yeah.
we're proposing is to keep in the tension, keep in the discomfort until there's a true, we see it when we role play with people as well, really close up. But in the conflict room, we see it too. When you get something, it's like your whole body relaxes, your shoulders go
Mhm.
down, there's a sigh, like, we've arrived. Like, don't go to problem solving until you get to that sweet spot where we
Mm.
understand each other. And that next step, as Gord said, that step 7 is okay. We've gone beyond understanding each other. We're now ready to problem solve, innovate and problem solve.
Yeah. So
I
I
love
think
it.
I think if you sort of trace our conversation today, that one of the things it does is distinguish a little bit between the team context and the 2-person context. Because just now we've been talking about the 2-person context and how to get to the full creativity. You have to really go through a significant conversational process to release that. But in a team dynamic, there may be conflict there, but as long as it's not crippling, you can go into a conversation. Then I think you can introduce the notion of creativity earlier on, right?
Mhm.
Is that term Linda Hill has coined, what is it? Creative abrasion, right? It's another way of talking about that sort of confrontational element that can be there. As long as you're conscious of it, you can manage it and you don't bruise each other, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 I
Yeah.
love how you described. Oh, sorry, Gordon.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing I've been wanting to throw in, which is just that, if we speak to the mediation field, it's probably not done a fantastic job of maximizing creativity. And part of the reason I think is when 2 people are really having a struggle, there's a lot of effort getting to the point where they can actually have a creative conversation. And there's a bit of a, whew, we did it. And maybe a little bit of loss of attention to, okay, there's something here that we really want to maximize the opportunity of this, right? And
Yeah.
because of the fatigue of getting there, maybe mediators haven't focused as much on imagination and creativity as we could as a field. Now I know
Yeah.
our colleague who Julie and I,
Michelle.
well, I was actually thinking of Gordon Sloan, who we've
Oh.
both learned a great deal about, was saying this 20 years ago, that mediators could pay more attention to enhancing
Yeah.
imagination and creativity. So I
I
still
just,
think it might be the case. Yeah.
I'll just add,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we interviewed Gordon Sloan, not about creativity, but on our podcast. But I was also thinking of Michelle LeBaron, who has done a lot of work about conflict and creativity. She's done some
Yes.
projects with dancers back east,
Mhm.
and the relationship between creativity and conflict. And we did interview her, and she did talk about creativity and conflict.
Yes.
I'm only remembering in this moment, but
Mhm.
Tracy, I think that you
Nice.
would really enjoy that interview. So if
Yes.
you go to our website on conflictpodcast.com, go in the search bar and put her name, Michelle LeBaron, you'll love her.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll pull that out for our listeners and, spotlight that just so that everyone can have the benefit of hearing that. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that piece in.
Yeah.
As you were speaking there, I was thinking about, I began as a young woman in family law.
Mhm.
And I think, obviously, well, obvious to me. I'm very visual. And so I think in pictures sometimes. And so as I was listening to both of you, I was thinking about that notion of, working with someone, and it's kind of like we're in the basement, in the parking lot garage of this skyscraper. And in that initial part, we're working to support them to get to ground zero, or, where we might actually enter the elevator, as we call it, main. And the opportunity is to work with someone, from sort of main floor to the penthouse in terms of the relationship. And I was thinking about family law, and I was thinking about, oftentimes it was about supporting just even two individuals to come to the table, to be able to come to the table and talk about some of the, resolving some of their differences in order to get to this place of communication.
Mhm.
But the penthouse for that, as you were talking about, is kind of like, oftentimes we'd leave our conversations right there when we might have, and I know, mediation has gone a long way in terms of its impact on family law now, and it's changed, and we have this notion of co-parenting. But to me, that back in the day, that would have been the penthouse, is to, use creative conflict once you'd established that main floor with those two individuals to get there,
Mhm.
anyways, that just popped in my head as I was thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, lean in there. The co-parenting model being one of potential outcomes for creation, if you will.
Mhm.
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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Other thing I'm wondering about, I think some of our conversation might be winding down, but Tracy, you had an impulse to contact Gordon and I and to have this conversation. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Are there any burning questions or things that you think you'd like to explore with us on this topic before we start to kind of wind down?
Well, I'm really curious. You know, I think we've touched on some of the key points that we really wanted to sort of riff about. I think the thing we haven't necessarily touched on, unless it was covert, nudging Gordon here, was the cosmic creation process may have given rise to conflict and creativity at the same time, at the risk of running down a big rabbit hole. Maybe another podcast to come with the two of you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe a little support for our audience to maybe jump into your thinking a little.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. So I'm an abstract thinker, or a part of me is. So if I'm not making sense, then I give you, full invitation to stop and ask a question or whatever. But so first of all, I would say, and there's some premises to what I'm going to say. And one would be, if you can accept, or it makes sense to you, that when you have a conflict with someone, or any conflict has an element of difference, like people see something differently, or they want something that's different from the other. Right? I think it's a pretty common experience and understanding of conflict. So then if we say that difference is part of conflict, and then we kind of, we stand back from our living situation, even our planet, and we look at the universe as a whole, and then we listen either to cosmologists or religious spiritual people. There's a pretty common narrative that things started out with some kind of unified whole. Now, this may not be true of every tradition, but it's certainly true of many traditions, cosmology plus different religions. There was some kind of oneness. And that at some point, that oneness gave birth to more than one, diversity, right? So the process of going from one to many is a creative process, right? The many weren't there before, so they became. So that's the creative part. At the same time, the one, which didn't have differences, also created things that are different from each other. As soon as you have two things, one of them's different from the other. So the actual moment of creation also becomes the moment of the creation of a difference. And as soon as you have difference, whether a conscious being exists or not, the potential in an abstract sense, is there for conflict. So they both happen at the same. So you could argue or say that just the fact that there's multiplicity in the universe means that there's some inherent, at least potential for conflict there, and there's also creativity there. And you could say that they, what gave birth to one gave birth to the other. Anyway, so that's my
my mind is both simultaneously blown, and I want to jump down this rabbit hole. And I made up a bunch of stories about this as you were speaking, and what birthed in my brain as you were speaking was that oneness then led to creativity or creation that led to then, two things are different, one thing being different from the other. And then this notion about full circle is that it's that sense of oneness. We're all one after all, it comes back to that oneness.
Mm-hmm.
And how interesting that we find ourselves as a planet in constant conflict somewhere, and the opportunity in what you just shared is like an embracing of the oneness to come back to where we began.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, did I make that up, or is that just a, part of my pipe dream that at one day we might experience a world at peace?
I don't know about that one, but I do think there's an inference that I would make the same inference, that there's perhaps the opportunity or the possibility of an awareness of some greater unifying aspect there, right? And that would certainly be like one of the main principles in the Indian philosophy of Vedanta, right? The difference is there, but fundamentally there's stronger unifying elements. Maybe there's a way for human beings to be more in touch with those, and maybe that would help in conflict. And those are big questions, right? But
yeah,
and something, and Julie might want to add to this. There's the notion of working on self in conflict, but there's also the notion of growth of self. Those two are obviously connected, right? But if we're speaking about growth of a person through a conflict experience, we could also collectively speak about growth of humanity in being able to deal with conflict better, right? So is it possible that the human species is on a kind of a journey of needing to be more conflict competent through greater awareness? And someone that Julie and I quote quite a bit, Robert Keegan, who was a Harvard psychologist. I wasn't at the workshop, but Julia said he talked about this there. But his quote that we often say to people is, conflict is a challenge to our pretense of completeness. And we like to add the little piece to make it, conflict is a challenge to the pretense of completeness of the self. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Julia?
Yeah, I'll just add one small piece riffing off what Gord was just saying and about what both of you are exploring in terms of the higher universe. Gord, when you were saying, this idea of the growth, that conflict, coming out of conflict, we have the opportunity to have growth of a person, growth of humanity. I got this image of expansion. And the more that we can expand, the more we're connecting to greater, the more we're connecting to the all. And so, what are we really here to do anyway? Everybody seems, not everybody, but there are many, many hypotheses about what this planet is here for us to learn generally as a species, right? And so maybe some of it is, we get plunked down here with the illusion of separateness. And we're trying to journey our way back to completeness or wholeness. And conflict is this great mirror, this great teacher, and this great reminder that we aren't complete and that we have an opportunity to be more complete through healing of self and connection with other.
Mic drop moment from both of you. Amazing. I know I'm conscious of time. I don't want to cut us off short because this is delicious. And I really am curious, is there anything today that you're still burning to share, that you would, love to bring into our final moments of this delicious discussion?
Want me to go first, Gord, or you?
Yeah, no, you go first, because the moment I feel fairly complete, but as you're speaking, I may come up with something.
Okay. I just want to end it on, Tracy, something that might end up causing all three of us to want to come back. But, Gord and I's newest fascination is the deep relationship between conflict and the expectations that we have of leaders. Whether these are our organizational leaders, our community leaders, or our political leaders.
Mm.
What is the criteria upon which we can evaluate competency in conflict? Because the way that we evaluate it now is through quick resolution and power over. And what the three of us have been exploring through this whole hour, I think, needs to come into the leadership dialogue. I did my master's in leadership. I talk about this quite a bit. I did my master's in leadership a few years ago. There wasn't one course on conflict.
Yeah, which is surprising.
Yeah, because what we know is leaders spend a lot of their time engaging in some way, right? So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but yeah.
No,
But anyway,
not at all. That's brilliant. And yeah, another engaging topic right there.
Yeah, and if you go to our website, on Conflict Leadership Institute, the top of the main page is a photograph of the cosmos. So it kind of links these two conversations. We had a big struggle as to what image to put there, but that was what we ended up with.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love it. Absolutely. Because I mean, it to me, what comes to mind is holistic leadership. It's the emotionally intelligent, and I know that has certainly brought a new element. I think a new old element. It struck me that the leaders that stand out in my mind had a competency with self-awareness. They had the fundamental components that we have talked about: a flexibility, a generosity, a vulnerability, a transparency, a willingness to, so I am super curious about that. And I'm really excited to, watch and learn as you two dabble in this a little more. So definitely here a great excuse to have you come on back when you've dabbled a little more and can bring your creative genius together and share what you're discovering. Yeah.
well, thank you, Tracy, and for your generous listening, reflecting, and engaging with us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. You two are up to such great work. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to join us here today. Your new institute, I'm sure our listeners will want to check out your programs and everything that you have on the go, including your podcast of your own on conflict, which is brilliant. I've listened to a few segments of it. And Julia, as always, your newsletter is always full of delicious, topics. And yeah, you're just two incredible humans. Thank you so much for gracing us with your time and our listeners with this incredible topic. And I'm sure we'll hear more from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Talk to Tea with Julia and Gordon. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe and always leave room for a little magic in your life.